The latest Progress in International Reading Literacy study has found that 81% of grade 4 pupils in South Africa can't read for meaning. Now, this means roughly 8 out of 10 children need help locating and retrieving information, even in simple and easy text. Let's unpack the story further. We're joined by Nic Spaull, who is an associate professor, of economics at Stellenbosch University. Nic, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. You know, I asked my team for the Business Day coming into this discussion with you because there's an opinion piece, an editorial opinion on the front page of the Business Day, which calls this a disgrace, and it calls on our education officials to hang their heads in shame.
Yeah, I also read that editorial, and I think that one of the arguments that they make is that extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And at the moment, we're just seeing business as usual. We're pretending as if we haven't just had a 2-year pandemic that set the whole country back by about a year in terms of learning outcomes.
You know, I'm actually at a loss for what to say, because the impact of being unable to read for meaning at the level of grade 4, where these pupils are being introduced to a whole range of other subjects. There's natural science and technology, there's geography, there are mathematics questions. All of these subjects require the ability to read for meaning. What does this mean for general education outcomes?
Sure. So I think something that your viewers will probably find useful to know is the way that the South African curriculum works is that the first 3 years of school are what we call the learning to read phase. And from grade 4 onwards, it will be the reading to learn phase. So in other words, you need to use those first 3 years of schooling to understand how the spoken word is represented in printed text on a page or on a screen. And if you don't do that, if you struggle to read, if you read too slowly, if you read inaccurately, in other words, you can't read for meaning, you can't read a simple text and understand what you're reading, you will always be further and further behind the curriculum as you progress through the grades. And as you say, as soon as you start getting into content-heavy subjects, if you don't know how to read and to read fluently and accurately, you're really going to struggle in school.
So where are we going wrong? You talked about, at the start of our conversation, extraordinary times require extraordinary measures. Are we seeing these measures in place? No, unfortunately we aren't. But even before we get to the extraordinary times and the extraordinary measures, we must remember that we had a reading crisis even before the pandemic. Right.
So in 2016, 78% of kids couldn't read for meaning at any level. That was the last time we took part in pupils. And now in 2021, that's gone up to 81%, which is an increase, and we should be worried about it. Children are about 80% of a year of learning behind where they were in 2016, but it's not as if this was a new crisis, I think is the one thing I wanted to emphasize. So in terms of extraordinary measures, I think if we're looking internationally, you can see that countries that have prioritized reading and literacy, they make sure that every single teacher knows how to teach reading, the first one, that they're equipped with the types of books and resources that they need to teach reading, and they also assess reading. So in South Africa, we have this huge jamboree every year in January when the matric results are released. There's huge political pressure. There's competition between the provinces. So much resources get channeled towards second chance matric programs. And what do we have about primary school? We don't know actually what's going on in primary school until these sorts of assessments come out every 5 years, when they say it turns out that 80% of kids can't read at grade 4. We can even go earlier. At grade 1 level, 50% of children in no-fee schools don't know all the letters of the alphabet by the end of grade 1. And that's after 200 days of schooling. Wow. They still don't know all the letters of the alphabet. So I think the wheels are coming off really early in grades 1, 2, and 3, even before that in ECD and grade R. And at the moment, we don't have a minister or a president who are allocating political will or accountability to make sure that we make progress in this area.
Yeah, we'll get to the accountability issue as well, because this certainly is a situation that requires some kind of sanction insofar as the basic education minister is concerned, right? When we talk about what your outcomes should be as Minister of Basic Education. Let's backtrack and go back to the findings from this study, Nic. And what's probably more harrowing, or it's up there with a story that is in its entirety harrowing, is that no-fee schools are the worst affected insofar as these outcomes are concerned.
Yeah, so I mean, that was what we anticipated, is that the pandemic would exacerbate the existing inequalities in South Africa. And the reason for that is, if you think of the resources that homes have as well as schools, if you're attending a Model C school or a private school, you have an internet connection at home. Only about 10% of South African households have an internet connection at home. When schools were closed in 2020 and when there were rotational timetables in 2021, you could continue to some extent with your schooling. There were Zoom classes with teachers. Teachers would send back certain workbooks and homework and mark it. There were WhatsApp groups, all of those kinds of things. But in no-fee schools, when schooling wasn't happening, learning wasn't happening.
Yeah.
So I think we saw this breaking apart of the inequalities that we already have, and we're seeing that in the data. English and Afrikaans schools didn't actually perform differently between 2016 and 2021. But African language schools perform significantly worse.
Yeah. It's poorer students who are already in that situation that now in the coming years have even less of a chance of finding meaningful work, of participating in the economy with dignity.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's quite a lot of research that points to things like grade repetition and dropout as being predicated on low literacy and numeracy outcomes earlier on. So if you're struggling to understand what the curriculum is saying, you're struggling in school with your teachers in terms of knowledge and understanding and ability to apply that knowledge in your schoolwork, you don't see the relevance of school. It's not enjoyable. You don't see a future in an academic stream. So you end up dropping out, or you end up repeating grades. Or not passing matric with marks that lead you anywhere in life. You can't go to technical college, you can't go to university or anything like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think we're going to see more of that in the coming decades, because it wasn't just the grade 4s that were affected by the pandemic. It was the entire schooling system that was closed for nearly an entire year, if you add up all the days that we had rotational timetables and school closures in 2020 and 2021.
You made a comment just earlier about the role of teachers here. Do our teachers know how to teach reading in the foundation phase? I mean, it's like a question that I shouldn't be asking you, but here I am asking you.
It's a horrible question to ask. It's a horrible question to answer. The answer is no, they don't. We don't have any evidence that most teachers in no-fee schools actually know how to teach reading, or that they were taught how to teach reading. So it's almost like this is no fault of their own. You know, more than half of teachers that are currently in the system are aged 50 or older, which means that they were trained under apartheid. We now actually know how you teach children to read. There's a science of teaching reading that progresses from phonemic awareness and understanding of the sounds in language all the way to letter sound knowledge, blending and segmenting letters and syllables into words so that you can play and understand how words are created and how words are made from sound. Those are not simple things. If I say to you, you can read, go teach this child to read. That's not how it works. You really need to be taught and have specific books, anthologies of graded readers that sequence phonetically regular stories that go up from story 1 all the way up to story 66 in some instances. And most teachers don't have those books. And most teachers don't have that training. So, yeah, it's not a surprise why we're not seeing improvements in reading outcomes. It really isn't a surprise, because we're not allocating the time, effort, resources, accountability, anything towards trying to improve reading. And this is despite the president's 2019 statement that this was a top 5 priority.
That's why they call it the foundation phase, right? Because of exactly how you've outlined how children learn to read. One of the other interesting findings is that just if we compare ourselves to other countries, Brazil, the average grade 4 child in Brazil is, according to the study, 3 years ahead of the average grade 4 child in South Africa. That doesn't necessarily mean that that child is at grade 7 level. It just means that that child is where they should be at grade 4 level, whereas in South Africa, a grade 4 child is probably at grade 1 level.
Yeah, so that was a striking finding, because this is one of the first times that Brazil has actually participated in the study. And obviously, we like to compare ourselves to Brazil. It's a large country. It's very unequal. We have roughly the same GDP per capita. Another way of interpreting what you've just described, of saying that South Africa is 3 grade levels behind Brazil, even though we both are testing our grade 4s, is in South Africa, children have about a 20% chance of learning to read. Right? So if we're thinking 19% of kids learn to read, the average kid, although there isn't actually an average kid in South Africa, you've got a 1 in 5 chance of learning to read. In Brazil, 60% of their grade 4s learn to read. So you've got a 3 times higher chance of learning to read if you're a grade 4 child in Brazil than you do in South Africa. In South Africa, only 19% of kids read. In Brazil, it's 60%. And it's not just Brazil. It's also Egypt, Jordan, there's Iran. All of those countries are in the sort of 50-60% range of kids that learn to read. It's only in South Africa that you have this sort of 19-20% of kids that can read.
Yeah. So let's talk about sanctions then, Nic, for the people who are heading up basic education. The president called it one of his top 5 priorities. That was some years ago, the issue of literacy. Here we are with these disgraceful statistics, our grade 4 children. So they're 10 years old. They cannot read for meaning. What should happen here?
So I think this is the bigger issue in South African politics is the lack of consequences and consequence management. So there just are no consequences for a lack of performance, whether that's the minister disciplining the DG or the DG disciplining the deputy director generals. It just doesn't happen. Everyone just says, oh, this is not my problem. Like there's so many other issues in the system that I'm dealing with. So even things like the annual performance plans, the president signs a contract with the minister that basically says these are the 5 or the 10 things that you need to focus on while you are the Minister of Basic Education for this administration. And one of those was reading. If you go and look at the annual performance plans of the Department of Basic Education for 2022 and 2023, and you look at the specific indicators, how many kids have access to books, how many assessments were done looking at early grade reading using an AGRA assessment, it's shambolic. It's sort of 10, 12, 15 schools. We have 15,000 primary schools in South Africa. It really is disgraceful. I don't think that people are blowing up, making a mountain out of a molehill. This really is a mountain. And we don't have a minister, who, in my view, who is taking this seriously enough. We don't even have a national reading plan. How do you make progress in reading if you don't have a plan? I mean, the most recent expose that Carte Blanche did and Ground Up, where they exposed the department and said, using PIRE requests, we are forcing you to give us your reading plan. And if you look at it, it's just a 47 bulleted point table with everything down to things, literally, and I quote, the inside wrapping of chappies. This is one way to promote literacy, making partnerships with big business to make sure that there's text on their wrapping. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Disgraceful, shambolic, what an incredibly heartbreaking story, and what a disservice this is doing to our children who have such a low chance as it is of participating meaningfully in the economy. And with these reading statistics, that chance diminishes even more. Nic Spaull, let me thank you for weighing in on this story. And as you say, this is not making a mountain out of a molehill. This is a mountain. And those responsible in education need to hang their heads in shame.